welcome back to Cross Stitch the Globe. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Allison.
And this is a channel about cross stitch. Today is a Flosstube University, which are short beginner tutorials to help new stitchers. And we haven't had one in a few weeks, so it's exciting to be doing this again. Also
together. You've been doing them.
Yeah, because
solo.
Allison was really sick, and then that backed up our extra schedule, and that was all seasonal stuff that like needed to get out the door. So we do have 3 kinds of videos on our channel. This is my favorite kind to edit because it's 10 minutes. So my life is going to be so much better this week. Now, the other kinds of videos, these come out on Thursdays. And the other kinds of videos we have are regular Flosstube episodes, which are where cross stitchers go on like really personal journeys through their stitching and tell you all the things they're working on. They're really fun. It's a great way to make friends in the stitching community and learn about what patterns are out there and what people are really experiencing with projects. See, everyone's like, they're so fun. And so subscribe. If you've never watched one before, they come out every other Monday. And we also mention a lot of other channels, people who we're friends with, people we just admire, that you can also follow. So if you wanted to, you could literally watch cross stitch on YouTube 24 hours a day and never run out of new videos because there's so many good ones. And then in between every other Monday, we do Flosstube Extras, which is where we take a topic that we don't have time for normally, and we do give it its own deep dive for like an hour or so. And right after we record this, we're going to record our Mirabilia Whip Parade. And if you don't know what a Mirabilia is because you're a super new stitcher, subscribe.
Be careful though, because Stephanie didn't know a year ago. I'm about to find out.
18 months, 18-ish months ago.
How obsessed someone has become.
Yeah, and then some other ones we put out recently, so that'll come out on Monday in real time. Other ones we put out recently, we did a free Halloween patterns video. We did another video on free autumn patterns because some people stitch one, some people stitch the other, some people stitch both. So there's over 70 free patterns between the 2 of those videos that we listed the links to.
Great ones.
Yeah, next year I gotta get some of those on my rotation. And then another free video or another extra we did recently was a wrap up of our state fair entries and what ribbons we got at the state fair this year. So if you're such a new cross stitcher you didn't know you could enter a state fair competition, well, subscribe and go check that out. And any video I mentioned or any channel I mentioned or Allison mentions, we will link to in the description. All right. This video is really for beginners because you might be new to cross stitch, and if you got a kit, it might have come with a hoop. If you picked up a hoop at the craft store, it probably looks like this. And screw top, basic craft store screw top and kit screw top hoops are great. Allison has been stitching almost exclusively for 7 years and never moved past them. So this video is not saying you need to move past them. And Allison has we did a whole one of these videos at Flosstube University on all of Allison's like advanced tips. And even some people that have been stitching for 3 decades watched that video and said, oh, I never thought about this like that. Never thought about, because we always are learning from each other and everybody does stuff differently. So if you're using a craft store hoop and you watch this whole video and you're like, I think I'm going to stick with my craft store hoop, there's no reason you ever have to move past it. This video is just designed to tell you, okay, well, if there is the craft store hoop and then there's a few other things people use to hold their fabric when they do cross stitch, and you may be interested in some of those.
And I've tried other ones. I just have gone back to them.
Yeah. And you also might see some in other people's videos and think like, oh, I can never do that, or it's like, that's too fancy for me or whatever. And it might really just be like a matter of preference or the size of project or budget or, just like having never seen it. And so you can stick with a craft store hoop, and we're just going to tell you what the world is beyond hoops. And then you can decide if they're interesting. A lot of these we don't personally use, and where we don't use them or have any videos on them, we'll tell you some stitchers who put out videos who use them a lot. You might be interested in checking out their channel and seeing how, like they might not have a tutorial about it, but you might be interested in just seeing like, what does it look like when someone uses X? All right, so videos we do have on our channel. So we have a video about craft store hoops, and then I actually prefer, I stitch with hoops all the time, but I don't like craft store hoops. I actually prefer vintage hoops, and this is a spring top hoop from the Gibbs company. This is one of the newer old hoops that I use. And we put out a whole parade of all of the vintage hoops that I have. And I walked through what they are. And I loaded one up. So if you're like, I like my hoops, but I also like to be fancy and use old things, then go check out that video. And that will enable you. And also, it might just be, if you like to go thrifting, you might just want to know what those are. So if you see one at the thrift store for $2, you know, oh, I could sell that for $300, or I could sell that for $20.
Yeah.
Like, so go check out that video if you're like, oh, I want to be fancier, but I still want to use a hoop.
Yeah.
Then there are QSnaps, and QSnaps look like they can be different shapes. They can be like bigger or smaller than this because they come apart. And you put your fabric on them, and so you can, they come apart, which means you can assemble them into different configurations. There are QSnap brand QSnaps, like this one. There are off-brand QSnaps. They even sell some off-brands at the craft store. And you put your fabric on it.
And you use the QSnaps.
I do use QSnaps. When I want something with like a little more real estate, or somehow, for some reason in my head, when something is like truly just a picture, I like a QSnap. I don't know why, but like I do. So I also use a lot of QSnaps. Probably 25% to 75%. Probably 25% of the time I use a QSnap. But I have a series of 3 videos. Allison wasn't there because she doesn't like QSnaps.
I find it too heavy because I'm so used to really cheap craft store ones that these, well, they're not really heavy. I mean, they're, ounces.
Yeah.
But
they're bulky. They're not heavy. They're bulky.
They're bulky. Yeah. I found it awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're like, oh, that's interesting, that looks cool, or I've heard of a QSnap, or I bought a QSnap, but I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
I have a video like introducing the concept of QSnaps and like what they are and like all about them and tips. Then I have a separate video where I just loaded the fabric because I knew some people wouldn't want 40 minutes of backstory on QSnaps. They're just like, I have a QSnap in my hands. What do I do? So I have one about loading fabric. And then I have another one where I assembled a QSnap because I forgot to do that in either of the other videos, and somebody mentioned like, oh, it was hard for them to put it together. And also I took all of the reader tips that people had left, or viewer tips that people had left in the comments of the first 2 and added the ones I thought were really helpful. So if you are like, oh, QSnaps, that's interesting and cool, go check out those 3 videos and I will link to them in the description. Okay, so that's what we use. But there's actually a world of things beyond that we don't use, and because we're really happy with the systems we haven't really ventured out further, but it's always nice to know what else is out there. So beyond QSnaps, if you still want to stay in the world of like hoops in terms of like kind of how they function, the weight, the size, there's 2 brands of hoops that look very distinctive, and people talk about, they have like their own like I'm in the cult of vintage hoops. There are people in the cult of the Nurge hoop. There are people who are just like real stands for Morgan hoops. So Nurge hoops, there are different kinds of Nurge hoops. There are the ones you'll typically see are like rounded rectangles, and they can get your fabric really, really, really tight. Now, I was talking to one of my friends about possibly getting one. She said one of hers got her fabric so tight she couldn't, like, she was like worried about the fabric, but also you could there's probably things you can do, and there's different ones, but you'll see people use Nurge hoops. And I'm going to just put a picture of a couple Nurge hoops here. They're the ones you typically see people talk about are the rounded ovals, but there are also circular Nurge hoops. And some people who are on Flosstube who are real big proponents of Nurge hoops, who talk about them a lot. I would say Jordan, the tattooed stitcher, in her last video, she talked about what she does with her hoops. I think she usually uses the round Nurge hoops, but she talks about like how she tightens it and what tape she buys to tighten it and everything like that. So I'll link to her channel in the description if you're like, oh, I would like a hoop that's even tighter than the hoops that I have. And QSnaps get your fabric real tight too, but people like Nurge hoops like Nurge hoops. So if you're like, want to check Jordan out, check her out. And then my friend Rebecca from Beck Stitches Everything also uses a lot of Nurge hoops, but I've gotten her to get a couple of vintage hoops. So I'm trying to get her over to our side. But no, a lot of people use like a combo of things because different projects sometimes just feel different.
You do switch up versus what the vibe is.
Yeah, my projects have vibes. Yeah. So that's a Nurge hoop. Now there's also a Morgan hoop, and a Morgan hoop, some people will use it just as, I think they were originally for punch needle. Some people
Really?
just like
Are those the stands?
Yeah. So
Okay.
some people just like the top that acts as just a regular hoop, and they just like that style. But then some people really like to put their Morgan hoop on like it comes with like a little. So there'll be like an inner hoop and a bigger hoop at the bottom, and I'm gonna insert a picture so I don't know why I'm describing it like I have to give you anyway. And some people will do two-handed stitching in their Morgan hoop. Some people use it like a regular hoop. Some people use it for two-handed stitching. And I would say go check out if you're like, oh, I would like, I'm curious about that. Rosanna from Bright and Dusty was just talking in her last video about using her Morgan hoop for two-handed stitching with double pointed needles, which I'd never heard of before.
Double pointed needles? Yeah. I have heard of people saying that they have stopped turning it around and just go up. I know, down. Yeah. So that would make sense.
But she has truly, anyway, so I'll link to her. And then also Megan the Seattle Stitcher, I think exclusively uses Morgan hoops and talks about them a lot. And it also is really responsive. Like if you were to go watch one of her videos and ask her a question about using hoops, she would probably either respond to you or put it in a future video. So go check out those ladies if you're like, oh, I think a Morgan hoop sounds interesting. And check out, especially if you want to talk about the two-handed stitching, go check out Rosanna. And she I'll talk about it in the next Flosstube. But she had some good news lately. Hi guys, I'm editing at night. My schedule is a little off today because our other sister is in town. So I explained the Morgan hoops wrong. There are Morgan hoops that are more traditionally used for punch needle that have a top and a bottom. And then there are separate Morgan hoops that they sell that and the top and the bottom, that's called like a hoop with the stand. And then there's other ones that they sell that is just the top hoop. So I think Rosanna from Bright and Dusty uses the one with the stand is what I heard her talking about. And I think Megan the Seattle Stitcher, I think she mostly uses the ones that are just the hoops. But again, I'm not an expert on Morgan hoops, so I'm sending you to people that I know use them and chat about them and are also responsive to their comments. So you can go learn more information on their wonderful channels that you should watch anyway. And yeah, so back to the video. And then okay, so those are two other kinds of hoops that you'll hear people talk about that get a lot of like love that you can't like pick up at a craft store. All right, there's another kind of hoop that you can get at a craft store called a tension hoop. I actually own one. I don't love it. It's the kind where you
pull the metal one too. I don't use it.
Yeah, we don't use them, but there are some people who love them, and I know for a fact that Alicia, the Fanciful Flamingo, loves her tension hoops. So go follow her channel if you want to see and hear about tension hoops. I can't think of anyone else that's like a devotee of tension hoops, but she really is.
She really likes them. Yeah. I've heard a couple people agree with me that they don't get as tight. They just can't get as tight.
I don't always care if my fabric is super tight.
Yeah.
But for me, it's partially is it because I love what I have, and the one tension hoop that I have is smaller than I would normally do. But you know what? It might actually be good for like ornaments or something because I just have a very small one, and so I'm not gonna put it on most of my like. We're gonna film our Mirabelli Whip Parade next, and all of my projects are on fat quarters and fat halves. Like I'm not gonna put it on like, but I'm gonna do a bunch of ornaments.
You had an ornament,
so maybe I'll try some wishful linen. Okay, guys, this is a deep cut inside joke, and if you're very new, you're just not gonna get it, and I can't explain it. But maybe I'll put some windshield linen in a tension hoop and just see what happens.
Oh my god, it sounds like hell on earth, but
all right. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about. When you see these in a video or in the wild, and if you've never used one before, you might be very intimidated by them and also think they look super cool and fancy and that you could never be this elegant and you could never be this cool, but you can. It's just, they're not for every project. And
I feel that way about, go ahead.
And that is the scroll frame.
I feel that way about another. I'm very intimidated.
Oh, yeah, we'll get to that.
Very intimidated.
So scroll frames look so cool.
Fancy.
There's actually one on Facebook Marketplace for only $20. I'm not gonna get it because I don't need it, and I don't.
Maybe I'll get it.
But yeah, I'll show you the listing if you. Yeah. I was like, well, I spent my cross stitch budget for this month, and and I have to destash some stuff because my cross stitch budget is 0. So I'm in the
my
negative.
cross stitch budget is 0.
But anyway, you will see occasional on Facebook Market. We should just keep in the future when we're ready for some. We should just pounce on a Facebook Market. I've seen a few anyway.
It helps with the beading, I'm sure.
Because scroll frames can get expensive.
Yes.
Scroll frames are now there are less expensive ones, there are more expensive ones, but $20 is a really good deal if that gives you like a idea. Mm-hmm. There are some where you sew your project into the stretcher bars. There are some where it like claps on it and it uses like needles to get it onto the scroll frame. There are some big advantages to scroll frames in terms of like if you're beading, you can actually roll up the project and put like a level of fabric
gently.
So that it doesn't crush it, but still keeps the area you're working on tight. And if you're such a new stitcher that you're like beading, yes.
I have a solution.
But also, yes, sometimes people do beading in cross stitch. I mean, basically, if you started with like a Dimensions kit or like a craft store kit, there's a whole world. And subscribe and we'll show you that one. Magic carpet ride.
That's insane.
You just don't even know. I mean, like, it's a big world out there. Allison stitched for like 6 years before she knew that there was like other stuff out there. And
because you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know. But then as soon as you're on YouTube, you're like, oh my God, what? They're beading?
I know.
They're doing satin stitches? Anyway, so.
You know, you can add like metallic thread.
Glow in the dark thread.
Glow in the dark thread.
So stretcher bars, a lot of people also, or not stretcher bars, scroll frames. A lot of people like scroll frames or scroll bars too because they can have like a lot of real estate on a big project, put it in a stand, stitch two-handed on something really big. Some people still use scroll frames for smaller projects, but we have watched people that we know get scroll frames in the last year and get really good at them. Mm-hmm. So if that's something you're interested in doing and you have the budget to do it, you can learn it. It's not something only for fancy ladies stitching like hands across the sea prim samplers that are on like you can do it if that's something that interests you. And I'll say people I know who use scroll frames, Andrew the runner stitcher, who literally probably finished the Chicago Marathon.
Yeah, he only had 10 minutes to go when we started filming.
So he finished 6 minutes ago. Yay! And we'll talk. So Andrew the runner stitcher does stitch a lot of things on scroll frames. He just finished his first Mirabilia in a scroll frame with lots of beading. And I believe he started using a scroll frame with like
the mirror
in the last year, like since he started. So that's a good person to go to because also really responsive, and you can see him use the scroll frame. But also, if you left questions in it, he would probably be more than happy to answer because he's super active in the comments.
And Mrs. Hannah
Wolstenholme. She uses
Follow her on Instagram because she shows beautiful pictures of her progress on her mirrors in the scroll frame.
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense, and that's why I want.
And someone else who that reminded me, but then it just also went away. You said Mrs. and I was like, and then you went a different direction, and I was like, yeah, you're right. But then
she's only Mrs. that I.
Yeah, but not Mrs. But it was just like it's gonna come to me. Anyway, scroll frames are not just, they are something where if you think that would be good for your stitching, you can do it. There's also like Omonic frames, which are very expensive, and the Omonic system is very expensive. Yeah. But people who are super serious about their mirrors do swear by them. And I would say Annie, who is XO Needle in the Hay XO, has been testing out Omonic frames because she works with Stephanie from Lindy Stitches, and Stephanie is one of the American distributors of Omonic. So go check out Annie Needle in the Hay XO Needle in the Hay XO. If you're like, oh, I want to try, what is like the fanciest, most like chic thing you could do? Let me go check this out. And then his name is Don or Dune. I'll link to his channel below too. X Stitch. He has a room full of fancy ladies that are all beaded that he has stitched.
This wall is like amazing.
And he uses an Omonic frame in the whole Omonic stand, and it is
impressive.
Every time I see it, I'm like, I'll never be that cool.
Yeah.
But I could be if I had $2,000. I'm not going to spend that. But like, the level of seriousness that he puts into his work, it's like, of course, yeah. And he also on Instagram posts like updates of his stuff in the frames. And so if you're like, okay, I like the idea of scroll frames. What is the coolest, most expensive, like most solid version of a scroll frame? Check them out. But then also Hands Across the Sea, I think, has their own. I'm not sure, but there's lots. Like once you're in the world of scroll frames, then you'll find out what are the Toyotas, what are the.
I did hear that
BMWs.
The best fit for the Lowry stand is a scroll rod.
A scroll, yeah, and if you have
a Lowry stand.
So if you're interested in that, go check out the Runner Stitcher and start there. But also Mrs. Hannah Wolstenholme and June X Stitch. I think I'll link to them below. In the notes I'll be like scroll frames. Check these channels out.
Okay.
So like you'll know. And then the last one, which is like mind blowing because it's just like what is.
No, there's two more because there's what I'm doing, which is insane.
Okay.
And then there's the one that really scares me.
The one that is just like so fancy, but also like the most budget friendly.
It's the most budget friendly, but it also looks so freaking hard.
It's stitching in hand.
Some people don't use anything.
And
no tension, nothing.
They use their hands to create their own tension. And there's a lot of people on Flosstube who stitch in hand because if you're so serious about stitching that you learn to stitch in hand, some people learn from their family and they don't ever do anything else. But a lot of people are like, oh, what are the can I get to this highest level of
Yeah, and then you have your 56 stitchers in hand and you're like,
oh my gosh. So I only stitch one type of project in hand, which are these little car kittens from Cat on Creations that we have, and that's because they're so little and you keep them in these little pouches so you're not going to have hoop. Yeah. But they're only this big and so I just hold it. Yeah. And I'm only doing it on 8F. But there are people who do.
Most Mill Hills, but that's paper.
Yeah. And there are frames. Oh, I guess there are Mill Hill frames.
There are Mill Hill frames too, but.
So people to check out if you're like, oh, I would like to learn how to stitch in hand. I can't think off the top of my head of any tutorials on how to do it, but a few people that talk, about it a lot. Stitch and Mommy has tutorials, but then also in her videos when she's showing her project, she kind of talks about sometimes her stitch path and different things. And she makes tutorials, so if she doesn't have one that exactly answers your question on it, she might be if you ask her, she might be like, okay,
she has a lot of projects. Yeah, and she's finished a lot of projects.
And
she's
then
gotta be knowledgeable.
My friend Jen from Jen's Fiber Web stitches most of her projects in hand and is very responsive. So if you had questions and you watching her video questions about stitching in hand, she'd probably answer them.
Sarah Stitchery stitches in hand.
Yeah, and she actually learned how to stitch in hand within the last few years and is also very responsive and is a teacher. So I'm sure if you ask a question in the comments,
she seems like the nicest person.
Yeah, she would probably at some point be like, she's busy. We're all busy, but at some point she'd be like, okay, let me address this. But she does talk about stitching in hand on her channel at times. And her channel is just great.
It's just wonderful. Yeah. It's just
these are all channels that we love, and then you just notice how they stitch. None of them are people we only watch for a certain type of stitch. No. They're all wonderful.
Yeah. Go watch Sarah Stitcher. I'm just like, oh, we haven't seen her. I haven't seen her in a while.
I missed her last video. I gotta get caught up.
I did too. Anyway.
But I have a whip I'm gonna do next year that is 100% inspired by her. I mean, I'm not gonna stitch very much of it next year, but I'm gonna start next year. Okay, and then the last one.
All right, this one I made up.
This one is a needlepoint technique that we know other people have done, but Allison didn't want to invest in scroll frames, and she wanted to bead her whole project without having to move it around. So Allison,
I was scared of crushing the beads.
Yeah, so Allison bought needlepoint stretcher. Well, they're stretcher bars for anything.
They're stretcher bars for canvas.
For canvas, but they're more typically used by needle pointers.
Yeah,
and she had all the X's done. She's not stitching it, but she's
beading it
on stretcher bars. And if it goes well after this, we might put out a separate video on using stretcher bars for beading.
Okay. It's going well. I'm just letting you know.
Just because
you can't even see the beads because they're the same color.
She couldn't move her hoop around because you would crush the beads, but she's not cross stitching on this. She's only doing her beading.
I'm just doing the
beads.
As
you can see, it's not a drum tight situation.
Which is how I bead, or that's how I stitch. I don't like it drum tight.
Oh, really?
I like to be able to feel it through. Is that weird?
So that's kind of the world. I can't believe this video like is 24 minutes. I was like, this will be an 8-minute video, but
we had a few tangents.
So that is kind of the world of cross stitch beyond your craft store or kit hoop. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If there's something you do or you know someone does that we like left off the list, leave it in the comments, because right now I can't think of any, but you never know. Like there are lots of things, accoutrement out there that people use.
You're good about finding the variety. I like the hoops.
Yeah.
But cheaper the better.
We haven't tried everything, which is why we're trying to give you resources of where to go if something perked, like if you're like, oh, scroll frames, go to that. I do want to try scroll frames at some point.
I do want to try the scroll frame, especially for the beading.
Not to like get a stand, because it's not really. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Some people do just use a scroll frame without a stand and just pop it, but I would like to get a stand first, and that's not in the cards for a while. So, all right. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. If you're like, Mirabilia, what's that lady? Go back, because the video coming out right before this is our that we're filming in 10 minutes is our Mirabilia Whip Parade. So you can learn all about it. And subscribe so you get our next Flosstube in your feed. If you made it to this point in the video.
And I don't know.
I don't know either. We're just going to cut this out. All right, we're back. We figured it out. If you made it to this point in the video, leave a scroll emoji.
There is one.
There is one. Which it's really cute. It's like, and leave a scroll emoji, and that'll be our sync with language that you made to the end. And thank you so much. And I don't know what our next tutorial is going to be, because this kind of ends our series on holding your fabric and things, because it's kind of the end of our knowledge of it.
So the next step would be, we've done rating a chart, we've done picking out floss.
Yeah.
Maybe we start stitching. Should we put X's in?
I don't know. Maybe we should cut fabric next.
I don't know how to cut.
Maybe I'll cut fabric. I tried to do a cutting fabric one time, and the piece of fabric was the worst piece of fabric I've ever tried to cut by pulling a thread in my entire life. Not that I've done it a million times, but I've done it enough, right? Like I did it 4 times yesterday. But this one, so I trashed the whole video. Next tutorial, I will show you how to cut fabric by pulling a thread. And I don't think you pull a thread for Ada because it's constructed differently, but we'll also talk about
it is easy to cut.
It is easier to cut. So we'll cut fabric, we'll cut some fabric, and then so subscribe if you're not. And thank you guys so much. Bye.
Bye.